Good afternoon, everybody. If you're willing to, if you would turn on your cameras, just if you're willing to, I would appreciate it. It's just easier to teach when I know there's people that I'm actually talking to. Otherwise, I feel like I'm talking to a wall. So if you want to turn on your cameras, that would be fantastic for me. Thank you for that. So I'm Dr. Steve Charman, and I'm going to be teaching this course, Introduction to Social Psychology. You should all notice that you are, of course, muted, so the only voice you should hear is mine. So for this class and for the rest of the semester, if you have questions that you want to ask, feel free to either type them into chat or you can raise your hand digitally and I'll try to call on you if I notice that. It's probably easier for me to notice if you type something in the chat. So feel free to do that throughout the semester if you ever have questions. I can't guarantee I'll get to every question. It depends on how much time I have to go over material and things like that. But if you write questions in the chat, I'll try to get to them, okay, at some point. So feel free to do that throughout the class. Obviously, if you're here, you were able to get onto Zoom, which is good. I don't think you should have needed a passcode, but let me just get verification. If you needed a passcode, can you type yes into chat? Okay, and I don't see anything, so I assume that means everyone got in without having a passcode, right? So that so going forward, it shouldn't be a problem getting into this class. All of the classes are listed in the Zoom section on Canvas. You should have seen that when you logged in today. So should always be able to log in that way. You should also note that this semester, FIU is doing things a little differently than last semester. So this class is being taught as a hybrid class, meaning that 20% of the classes are being taught in person. So what that means is, and I think you should have seen this when you registered for the class, is that the last 6 classes, and the 6th class is actually the final exam. So the last 5 classes plus the final exam are actually going to be taught in person, okay? So that won't start until, what, March, I guess. So until March, everything's going to be online. But again, the last few classes will be taught in person. I taught this class last semester online. Things seem to go okay. I think I've smoothed out and ironed out any issues that I had, but if there are any issues that arise throughout the semester, so if, for instance, my internet goes out and I just get disconnected suddenly, just hang around for a few minutes. I will try to reconnect immediately. I don't think that's going to happen, but just in case, just stay around here. I'm going to try everything I can to try to reconnect if that were to happen. Okay, so we're gonna get started. You guys are kind of lucky to some extent because usually I've been teaching this class for like 14 or 15 years. And what I always do in the very first class is I get the students in my class to sing and dance for me a little bit. And you guys are lucky because I'm not able to do that teaching over Zoom. But that being said, I want to show you what I mean. So I actually took a video of this a couple of years ago. I want to show that to you. Hold on. So I'm going to share my screen. So again, this is from a couple years ago on the first day of class. Hit me over, pull me out. Excellent, great, thank you. Take a seat. Okay, so that was just my students singing "I'm a Little Teapot" and doing a little teapot dance for me, which is something, again, I would have had you do if we were in person, but unfortunately I can't do that. But my question to you, and the reason why I do this is to ask this question, is why is it that they did this? If you saw that something like over 95% of people were going along with this, right? Almost no one was sitting down and not participating. So how is it that I was able to get hundreds of students to sing and dance for me? What are the magical powers that I have that allow me to manipulate students in this way? And I presume that if I were to do this with you guys, that like 95% or more of you guys would do the same thing. So what is this magical power that I have to get people to do something? So I want to open this up. So write in the chat why you think I'm able to do this. Okay, so I've got a few similar answers, which is that I'm an authority figure, right? Okay, so I guess to some extent I am, right? I'm teaching the class, I'm a professor. To some extent, I'm in charge of your grades and things like that. But I'm not sure that really explains it. I mean, after all, I don't really have authority over telling you to dance for me, right? I can't abuse my power that way. You're well within your rights to not dance and sing for me. And furthermore, if it was just because I'm an authority figure, then I should be able to get you to do other things as well, right? So what happens is that every time I teach this class and I have students sing and dance for me, um, when people say that they're doing it because I'm an authority figure, I then tell them to punch their neighbor in the face. And in 15 years, I've never had a single person turn to their neighbor and punch them in the face. My question is, why not? If it's the fact that I'm an authority figure and you're just going along with me because I'm an authority figure, well, aren't I still an authority figure when I tell you to punch that person in the face? So maybe there's something, some aspect of the fact that I'm an authority figure that encouraged you to sing and dance. Maybe you wouldn't do it if it was another undergraduate student asking you to do it, but it can't be the full story, right? So what else? And I'm seeing people say things like herd mentality, people follow the norm. So one person does it, everyone else does it. Okay, so what you're basically saying is that there's some social influence as well, right? If we were in class and I asked you and only you to stand up in front of class and sing I'm a Little Teapot and dance around for me, suddenly you're probably much less likely to want to do it, right? Which means that your choice to sing and dance is partly a function, not just of my authority, but also a function of what other people are doing as well. It's easier to do it when other people are doing something as well, right? I'm seeing some people say things like it's harmless and fun. Okay, yeah, so that's a good point as well. So if you don't punch someone in the face, it's probably because you have some concept of right and wrong, right? You've got some standards of morality that you would be crossing if you were to punch someone. You know you can't just harm someone, but you're not crossing any standards of morality by singing and dancing, right? So what this means is that your behavior, your decision to sing and dance in this case, but your behavior in general is a function of multiple things at any given time. It's in part a function maybe of your personality. Whether you're a shy person or an outgoing person might determine whether you sing or not sing. But it's also a function of other things. It's a function of the fact that I'm a perceived authority figure. It's a function of the fact that there are other people who are also doing it at the same time. It's a function of whether that behavior transgresses your moral boundaries or not. These seemingly simple behaviors that we engage in are oftentimes a function of the complex interplay of a whole bunch of factors at once. And that's basically what we're going to be talking about in this class, is some of these factors that influence our behavior. But of course, as you guys point out, and as I've just been saying, there are, of course, limitations to this, right? I mean, you wouldn't punch someone, you wouldn't harm another living person, another living being, just because some stranger told you to harm them, right? I want to tell you a story. This is a surveillance cam shot. This is back in 2004. We're talking like 16, 17 years ago. This is in the back of a McDonald's. And you see two people in the shot. The woman on the bottom with her hands on her head like this. Her name is Louise Ogborn. Louise Ogborn is 18 years old at the time. She's been working at the McDonald's. She has started relatively recently to try to earn money for her family. And she's clearly in some amount of distress. And the reason she's in distress is because her manager, who is the woman at the top of the frame here, her name is Donna Summers, just like the singer, but not the singer, obviously. Her manager is on the phone with someone who has called that McDonald's, who has identified himself as police officer Scott. And according to Officer Scott, they've had this McDonald's under surveillance for a few weeks because there have been, according to him, a string of thefts where some employee at the McDonald's has been stealing money. And the description of the perpetrator, the person that Officer Scott thinks has stolen the money, is of a young woman with longish brown hair. And the only person that works at that McDonald's that meets that description is Louise Ogborn. So Louise Ogborn has been brought into the back of this McDonald's, and she's basically being told that Officer Scott thinks that she has stolen money. Now, from the outset, I'll tell you, Louise Ogborn is completely, utterly innocent. Okay, she has not stolen anything. She's obviously shocked by these charges. But even though she denies her involvement in these thefts, Officer Scott tells Louise Ogborn not to believe her, that he's sure that she has stolen this money. In fact, he's so sure that he tells her manager to search Louise Ogborn's purse to see if there's any money in there, to see if they can catch her red-handed. They search her purse and they find nothing. And he says, you know what? I still don't believe her. I want you, Donna Summers, to search Louise Ogborn's pockets as well. Have her empty out all her pockets to see if she has any money in there. She does so, and there's no money in there. And he says, you know, she might have hidden it somewhere else. Maybe she hid it in her bra or something. So have her take off her shirt. And she takes off her shirt, and there's no money there. And at some point while this is going on, the manager, Donna Summers, says, you know, I've got to manage this McDonald's. I can't be on the phone all day. And Officer Scott says, okay, well, is there someone else that you could bring in and take over? And she says, yeah, I've got a fiance, Walter Nix Jr. So Walter Nix Jr., her fiance, comes in and gets on the phone with Officer Scott while Donna Summers manages McDonald's. And Officer Scott fills him in as to what's been going on. And he tells Walter Nix Jr. that he's sure that Louise Ogborn is guilty. And he says, you know what? I still think she has the money hidden somewhere on her. What I need you to do is tell her to take all of her clothes off. Strip down naked. Now you can imagine Louise Ogborn in this situation, okay? She's been falsely accused of a crime that she did not commit. She is being held against her will now in the back room of this McDonald's. She is scared, she is crying, she is shaking, and now she's been told she has to get naked in front of a man she's never met before. And this keeps going on. Obviously, they don't find any money on her. Officer Scott says, she might have hidden it somewhere in her body, so what I need you to do is have her do naked jumping jacks in front of you. And if she doesn't agree to this, if she doesn't comply with your demands, I need you to bend her over your knee and slap her, which he does. Officer Scott keeps making these sorts of requests, continually degrading Louise Ogborn, and Walter Nix Jr. is going along with them. In fact, he pushes these requests so hard that he tells Walter Nix Jr. at one point to have Louise Ogborn perform oral sex on him, to basically sexually assault her, which he does. For hours, she is kept in the back room, enduring this humiliation and degradation. Turns out there's no such person as Officer Scott. This is just some random person who calls up McDonald's, makes false accusations, and sees what he can get the manager to do. In fact, this is not even the only time this has happened. This person has done this over 70 times at different restaurants. At one point, he actually convinced the manager to strip search a customer who happened to be in the store at the time. Walter Nix Jr. eventually was sentenced to, I think it was somewhere around 5 years for his role in this. But if you had asked him, if you had asked Walter Nix Jr. or you had asked the manager, Donna Summers, the day before this happened, would you harm another person just because a stranger in authority told you to do so? They almost certainly would have said, like you would have said, no, of course not. You wouldn't punch someone in the face just because I told you to, and they wouldn't sexually assault and hold someone against their will just because some stranger on the phone told them to. That's what they would have said, probably. And they would have been completely wrong. In fact, this story was captured a few years ago in an independent movie called Compliance. If you want to hear more about it, if you want to learn exactly what happened, you can check out this movie to see what happened. It's a very harrowing story about what happened then. Okay, what I want to do now before I move on is to go over the syllabus. So you should have seen the syllabus online in Canvas. If you want to pull that out now, I will go over everything with you. But one of the main points I want you to take from that story, and something I'm going to expand upon later, is that it's often very difficult for us to predict how we're going to behave in a given situation. And part of the reason for that is because the situation affects our behaviors that we have difficulty anticipating. We like to say that we're a good person, and so we wouldn't do something like that. We wouldn't be influenced to harm another person. But it turns out that the power that the situation has in terms of dictating our behavior is oftentimes extremely strong, and in ways that we are largely unable to anticipate. And as a consequence, it's often hard to predict our own behavior, nonetheless the behavior of other people. But we're going to expand upon that idea more after we go over the syllabus. So let's just do that first. Okay, everyone has their syllabus out? If you don't, of course, it's in Canvas under the syllabus section. Okay, so first off, if you want to contact me, the best way to do so is via email through the email address that's on the syllabus. That's the charmans@fiu.edu. You can email me through Canvas, but it's easier if you email me directly at my FIU account because I don't really check my Canvas email very much. And if I need to send attachments, because if let's say you're asking me for a syllabus or something or other, it's more difficult to send attachments through Canvas than it is to send it through my FIU email account. So it's just easier to send email to me through my FIU email account. So I would suggest doing that if possible. My office phone number is also posted there, but that is my office number. And because of COVID, I'm just not in my office this semester. I probably won't be much at all. So probably that's not going to be a good way to contact me. So definitely email me if you need to. Obviously, because of COVID, I'm not holding regular office hours. So if you do want to discuss something, I can set up a meeting with you over Canvas. If it's just something small, we can probably do it at the end of class. I can set up a private breakout room or whatever. We'll figure that out. But if you need to talk about something, feel free to let me know and I can schedule a Zoom meeting or a telephone call or something. There's also no TA for this course this semester. Okay, so I'm going to be the one in charge of grading everything. The textbook that you need for this course is called Social Psychology by David Myers. I'm allowing you any of the last 3 editions of the textbook. So the 11th edition, the 12th edition, the 13th edition, any of those are completely fine. I just checked a few minutes before class started and I saw some used versions of the 11th edition for less than $10 on Amazon. So if you want to save some money, feel free to get a used version. And you can see at the very end of the syllabus, I've got a course calendar and I've got the page numbers and the chapters that you need for each of the 3 different editions. So whichever edition you pick up, just you can look at the appropriate course calendar at the last few pages of the syllabus. All right, let's talk about the course a little bit. So social psychology, as you're going to see, tends to look at how the situation, how the environment tends to influence our behavior. And I'm not going to go over the course description that's written in the syllabus word for word, but I want to point out a couple aspects of it. First thing I want to point out is that this is a scientific discipline. And what that means is that as social psychologists, we don't simply pontificate or philosophize or come up with ideas of how we think humans behave. We also have to test those ideas. We have to do so scientifically. And we're going to spend a significant amount of time, a couple classes at least, talking about what it means to be scientific, talking about the importance of having a scientific discipline to study human behavior. But just make that note that everything we talk about in this class, every theory we discuss, every finding we discuss is based on, in most cases, dozens, if not more, of empirical studies that people have conducted to test these ideas. Second thing I want to point out, which is related to the first, is that I do want to focus on critical thinking skills in this class as well. I think the events of last week have shown that large portions of this country are lacking in some basic critical thinking skills. There are all sorts of baseless conspiracy theories that are permeating this country. And in large part because people lack the basic critical thinking skills to know what is true and what is not true. So I want to focus on those critical thinking skills in this course. Another aspect of this description that I want to point out is that social psychology, unlike a lot of other areas, unlike a lot of other classes you might take, is directly applicable to your life. Now, I think that other topics like chemistry and biology and geology or whatever are all really important to have a basic understanding of. But it's probably not every day you need to know the atomic weight of boron, right? Social psychology is a little bit different because it discusses your behavior in day-to-day life and the behavior of other people in day-to-day life. You can take what you learn in this class and immediately and directly apply it to your life. And throughout this class, I'm going to give you many examples of how the theories that we're discussing, how the concepts we're discussing are applicable to your life. In fact, I strongly recommend, as we go through this course this semester, to try to deliberately, to explicitly link these ideas to some situation that's occurred to you in the past. Research has shown that that's a better way to remember things. So at the very least, you'll be better prepared for exams. You'll be able to remember material better if you link these ideas to your life. But also I encourage you to do this because you can actually use what you learn in this class to be a better person. And I'll give you many examples throughout the class of how you can do that. Okay? So I really want to stress the applicability of the material that you're going to learn in this course. I'm not going to go over each of the course objectives, but I do want to point out a couple of them. Course objective 4, for instance, is something I just talked about a minute ago, which is that I want you to be able to evaluate claims about human behavior from a critical and scientific standpoint. Because it turns out that a lot of people believe that they are experts in human behavior, and a lot of these people may not even know that a subject such as social psychology exists, which has actually empirically studied human behavior. And this is a problem because if you turn on the news, you see people arguing about the effects of some new policy on people's behavior. You'll see people throwing out all sorts of ideas about how they think people are going to be affected by these things. And a lot of what they say, though, is completely wrong or represents a complete misunderstanding of how people are motivated or why people engage in behaviors that they do. And so again, you need to be able to critically evaluate the claims that people make about human behavior and about how they're influenced by things. And so this course is going to be able to help you to do that. And the 5th course objective is that I want you to appreciate the power of the situation on people's behavior. This is the fundamental theme that's going to underscore basically everything you learn in this semester, which is how the situation affects people's behavior. This is in contrast to something like, let's say, personality psychology. Personality psychologists study people's, obviously, their personality and how their personality changes the way that we behave. Social psychology takes the opposite perspective. We study not people's personality, but how the situation affects how people behave, oftentimes regardless of their personality. In other words, people with very different personalities might behave very similarly in the same situation because of the power that the situation has on our behavior. And that power is often underappreciated. Most people do not know just how strongly the situation affects their behavior. So we're going to see how that relates to a whole bunch of topics within social psychology. Let's talk about the class requirements for a few minutes. The first thing I want to mention is that you should have received an email yesterday asking you to purchase an account for Top Hat. I want to explain briefly what Top Hat is and how we're going to use that. So Top Hat is a system for me to administer like quizzes and exams and things like that. It's kind of like iClicker if you used iClicker, except it's a little more flexible than iClicker because you don't have to be in the same room to use it, things like that. And you can use it directly from your phone or your laptop. You don't have to buy any external equipment or anything. So what you need to do is at some point in the next week, and I'll give you a week to do this. You don't have to do this for next class, but at some point in the next week is to purchase a Top Hat account. It costs $30 per semester. And this is partly the reason why I allow you to buy old versions of the textbook, because I want to try to offset that cost by allowing you to get a cheaper version of the textbook. And I'll go over exactly how Top Hat works in 1 week from today, so next Tuesday. So between now and 1 week from today, make sure that you purchase a Top Hat account so that you can see exactly how Top Hat works when I go over that. But we are going to be using it for all the quizzes that I give in this class, for instance. There are a couple ways that you can get a Top Hat account. In the email that you should have received yesterday, there should be a link that takes you directly to this class where you can register for an account and you sign up for this class when you do so. Alternatively, if you didn't get an email, that's fine. You can just go to the Top Hat website that's in the syllabus, click on sign up, and then you have to enter a class code, and that class code is in the syllabus as well. Okay, that class code links you to this class. Obviously, when you sign up for Top Hat, you need to indicate what class you're taking, so make sure that you do that. Yeah, there are different prices. I think one is for the $30 option, I think is for 1 semester. I think there's a higher price if you want to get like a lifetime subscription or something like that. Unless other classes are offering Top Hat, you won't need that. So most people are probably fine with just the 1 semester cost. As you're going to see, in order to use Top Hat, what will happen is I'll ask questions on Top Hat. As soon as I make the questions visible, they'll pop up on your phone or on your laptop. whichever one you're using to give your responses. You'll respond directly on your phone or on your laptop, and those answers, I'll receive those answers immediately. But again, I'll go through the details of that on next Tuesday's class. I obviously don't take attendance in this class, but you are, of course, responsible for any announcements that I make between 3:30 and 4:45 every Tuesday and Thursday. So make sure that if you're late by 5 minutes or you have to leave early or something, you might miss an announcement that I made. So what I'm doing is I'm recording all of my lectures. I am going to post those on YouTube, and then I'm going to link to them from Canvas. So I think in the modules section, there's going to be a section for recorded lectures. And as I give each lecture, as I record them, I'll add the link, which will link to a YouTube video. So if you miss a class, if you're late to a class, if you have to leave early, make sure that you check to see what you've missed so you haven't missed any important announcements or anything. My lecture notes are all up on Canvas for the entire semester as of right now. So you should have seen those. Again, in the modules section, there's a lectures subheading. And all my lecture notes for the entire semester should be in there immediately. Those lecture notes are not necessarily complete. A lot of them are point form. I mean, I didn't leave any blanks out or anything, but they're oftentimes in point form. They may not make sense unless you also attend the lecture. So again, if you miss a lecture, it's probably not sufficient just to get the lecture notes from online. It's probably best to also look at the YouTube videos as well. You can also see that on the last couple of pages of the syllabus, where I lay out what we're going to be discussing on what dates, on the rightmost column is the column for the chapter readings. Ideally, you will do those readings before the class in which we talk about them. Realistically, I know that's not going to happen for 95% of you, but at the very least, make sure to do those readings prior to each exam, okay? Because on each exam, there will be a couple questions that are drawn from the textbook that we did not go over in class. It's not going to be like little minor details. I don't want you to memorize every little minor thing that's in a chapter. But if, for instance, you're reading a chapter and there's a whole section for a couple pages on some topic we didn't discuss in class, there's a good chance that I'm going to ask a question about that general topic. Okay? So the textbook is also good, by the way, for if there's some concept that you're not quite understanding, I'm not explaining it in a way that resonates with you. Oftentimes the chapter might give different examples or it might explain things in a different way, which will help you to understand the material as well. Throughout the class, there will be 14 unannounced quizzes, which I'm going to administer via Top Hat. Those could be given at any point in class. They could occur right at 3:30. They could occur right at 4:45 or anytime in between. So another reason to make sure you're on time for class. Of those 14 quizzes, I'm only going to grade your top 10. Okay. So what that means is you could completely miss 4 quizzes and you could still get perfect on the quiz portion of the class. Okay. So partly for that reason, you can't make up quizzes for any reason because I'm already giving you a leeway of 4 quizzes that you can miss. Okay. So if you miss a quiz, there's no point asking me if you can make it up. I'm going to say no. That also means that if you choose to skip classes and you miss 4 quizzes and then you get sick, well, unfortunately, you've used up your allotment of 4. Okay. So I highly recommend not to just be skipping classes because you think you can drop your lowest quiz scores. Yeah, the quizzes are going to be done at a specific time. So you're only going to be able to respond to the quiz questions while I have them available. So usually what I'll do is the quiz will take, I don't know, let's say a quiz takes 5 minutes to do. So you've got like 1 minute per question and you've got to respond within that 1 minute. So if you're not around during that time, you won't be able to make them up. These are going to be mostly, almost entirely probably multiple choice questions, by the way. And I'm not going to make them particularly difficult because I don't expect you to have to study before every single class that we do. So they're going to tend to refer to material we covered in the last section, and they're going to tend to be, they're not going to be like minor nitty gritty details. They're going to tend to be sort of more basic conceptual ideas. And I partly use those to make sure that you guys understand the course material prior to the exams themselves. If I notice that people aren't doing well on a quiz question, I know I have to re-explain that concept a little bit better. There will also be 3 assignments that I will give in class. Those are also going to be unannounced. Well, I say they're unannounced. I'll probably give you like a class or 2 heads up before I give an assignment. I just don't know exactly the date I'm going to give them now, because it depends on a few factors, how quickly or slowly I go through material. So I can't say exactly when I'm going to give them now, but probably a class or 2 before I'll probably mention that I will be giving an assignment, but I can't guarantee that. So again, make sure you're coming to class. Or again, if you're not coming to class, make sure you're watching the YouTube lectures. Those assignments also cannot be made up. So make sure that you turn them in when they're due. They're usually going to be due 1 week from the day that I give them. That could vary, but generally that's what I do. So if I give it on a Tuesday, it'd be due the following Tuesday. You will turn those in through Canvas. And they are due at 3:30, the very beginning of class on the day that they are due, okay? And the way that Canvas works is I have to specify that I'm only accepting assignments up till a certain time period. And so I'm gonna say, you can only submit until 3:30 on the day that they're due. Once it turns 3:31, it's not gonna allow you to submit them at that point. So make absolutely sure that you get those assignments in by 3:30 on the day that they're due. These assignments shouldn't be complex. They shouldn't take more than, I don't know, maybe half an hour-ish or so to do for each one, maybe 45 minutes. But they shouldn't be complex. They're just like very small assignments I'll have you do. There will be 4 exams throughout the semester. You can see the exam dates on the last few pages of the syllabus. These exams are non-cumulative, so you are only responsible for material since the last exam for any given exam. So exam 2, for instance, it's only going to be comprised of material that I've talked about since exam 1. Now, that being said, there is some material we'll learn about at the beginning of the semester that will come back later on in the semester. So you can't just completely memory dump everything you've learned after you have an exam. These exams are going to be 30 points each. They're going to be 30 multiple choice questions. If you know you're going to be missing an exam because you know what the dates are already, then let me know probably about a week or 2 prior to the exam date. Ideally, what I would have you do is take the exam early. I do not let people take an exam late, okay? So ideally, what I would do is take the exam early. If you come up, if you have like a family emergency, a health problem at the last minute, something like that, so you don't have time to tell me ahead of time, then what I will do is have you take a makeup exam. The makeup exam will be comprised completely of short answer questions, okay? So it's going to be more work on your part to do. And I'm going to be a little more stringent when grading it as well, because it's going to be a take-home makeup exam, which means you're going to have access to your notes and things like that. So it's generally in your favor not to take the makeup exam if you can avoid it, to take the regular exam. But if you miss an exam for whatever reason and you have no other options, that's potentially an option for you, okay? But just try to let me know ahead of time if you're going to miss an exam. On my exams, I generally don't ask questions where I ask you to say, define a word or something along those lines. These are things you can just look up in a textbook. I tend to write more applied questions. They can be a little bit trickier, these questions, if you don't understand the material that we talk about at a deeper level, okay? So what that means is you can't simply memorize the notes and then expect to do well in the exams. Because what my questions will be like is something like, imagine John engages in this behavior. What theory best explains why John did what he did? Okay. But the example that I give you in the exams is not going to be something I ever talk about in class. I mean, it'll be related, obviously, to material. It'll be based on some basic theories that we discussed in class. But I will never have discussed that very specific example. So in order to answer that question, you have to understand these theories and these concepts at a deeper level than simply just memorizing the definition of these things, okay? I will help you do this. As I go over every theory, every concept, I will give you multiple examples. I'll be able to answer questions that you have. I'll do everything I can to help you understand it. but you need to make sure that you understand that these are conceptual ideas that you need to understand, not simply memorizing definitions. There are a couple ways to earn extra credit in this class. The primary way, which I'm sure you're familiar with, is via participation in SONA studies. I assume that those are all based on online studies right now. I don't think anyone's running studies in person, I don't think. And you can get, so the way this is going to work is that for every hour of participation in a SONA study that you do, you get up to 1 point in SONA. For every point you get in SONA, I'm going to double it for the purposes of this class, up to a maximum of 8. So what that means is that if you get 4 extra credit points in SONA, let's say you did 4 1-hour studies, that's 4 points in SONA, I'm going to double that to 8. Any more than that, you don't get any more points in the class, okay? So that maxes out at 8. Just make sure you look in SONA. Every study will tell you how many points it's worth. Some studies last 40 minutes, but they'll still give you the full point. There's some studies that might last 10 minutes that they only give you a half point. So just, it'll all be stated though in the study, on the study page in SONA. Again, I assume most people are familiar with this, but if you're not, you can register for an account on SONA Systems at the website that's listed in the syllabus. And I think it's fairly straightforward. Also, which is, I guess, a benefit to you, is that I'm the administrator of SONA Systems, which means if there are any issues that you're having, I have at any point a record of your entire history on SONA. I can help you out with whatever you need if you need to. Also, one of my graduate students, Laura Shamba, is the graduate student in charge of SONA. So alternatively, you can email her at her email address there, and she can help you with SONA stuff as well. But that being said, I don't anticipate people needing too much help with that. It should be fairly straightforward. The second option for earning extra credit in the class, if you don't want to do SONA studies, is that you can turn in papers. The topics of these papers will be posted on Canvas in the future. For each paper, which would be 2 pages or so each, you will be awarded up to 3 points of extra credit. Again, up to a maximum of 8. So what that means is that if you don't want to do your SONA studies, if you would rather turn in papers, the first paper would be worth 3 points. The second paper is worth 3 points. The third paper would be worth 2 points, right? Because that would get you to the maximum of 8 points total. You can mix and match SONA and papers. You can do a couple SONA and a paper, but again, you only have 8 points total. It's not 8 points for SONA plus 8 points for papers. It's 8 points total. However you want to get there, through any combination of SONA and papers is fine, as long as you know it's 8 points maximum. Okay, the way that grading works is fairly simple, although I've noted that students tend to overcomplicate it. So I just want to make sure it's very simple to you. So all I do is at the end of the semester, I throw all of your points into one pot, I add them all up, and I translate that into a letter grade according to the rubric on the syllabus. So there are 4 exams, 30 points each. That's 120 points. I'm going to grade your top 10 quizzes. Each quiz is worth 5 points. That's 50 points. So 120 for the exams plus 50 for the quizzes. That's 170. And there are 3 assignments. Each one is worth 10 points. So that's 30 points. So the class is out of 200 points. Extra credit is then added on top of that, but the class excluding extra credit is out of 200 points. You can see that if you want to get, for instance, an A in the class, you need to get 186 points. Okay. If you need to get a C in the class, which I think some people do, you need to get 140 points. And you know that from day one. And it's partly for that reason that I don't curve scores. I think it's partly because I don't think people fully understand what curving grades means. What curving grades, if I were to curve a grade, for instance, what that would be saying is that at this point, I know that only 15% of you could get an A in the course, and then 20% would get a B and 30% would get a C, et cetera. And so by curving grades, I'm putting a limit on how many people can get an A. And I don't really think that's fair, because if half of you deserve an A, I think half of you should get an A, right? So curving can actually work against students, which I don't think is often sometimes appreciated by students. And I don't want to penalize you for that. And the other reason I don't curve is because I want you to be able to know exactly what you need to get an A or a B or a C or whatever in the class. If I were to curve grades, then your grade depends on what everyone else does. And so you wouldn't know at any point in time what you need to get on the next exam to get a certain grade. I don't really think that's fair to you. So what this means in its grading scheme is that 1 point on an exam is equivalent to 1 point on a quiz, which is equivalent to 1 point on an assignment, which is equivalent to 1 point on extra credit, okay? At 1 point is 1 point no matter where it comes from. So if you want to get an A and you need 186 points, it doesn't matter how you get there. You just have to accumulate 186 points somehow to get an A in the course. Also, partly for this reason that I've laid out this rubric, I don't bump up grades at the end of the semester. Now, I also do this because, again, I don't think that's fair to students. Because if a student missed a certain letter grade by 2 points and I bump them up, well, it's not really fair to all the other students who missed the letter grade by 2 points who I didn't bump up. I don't think that's fair to people. So to keep everyone on the same playing field, to make things as fair as possible to everyone, I've got a strict rule on this. I'm just not going to bump up grades at the end of the semester. Okay? I have a little instruction here on how to calculate or how to estimate your grade at any given point in the class. The basic idea behind this is you take, if halfway through the class you want to know roughly what your letter grade is, take up all the points you've gotten in the class so far, divide it by all the points you could have gotten in the class so far, and that will give you a percentage, which you can then use to convert to a letter grade on this rubric. I walk through this in more detail on the syllabus. You can see that paragraph right under the rubric if you want more details on this. But this should give you a rough estimate of how you're doing in the class at any given time. Okay, if people need accommodations for disabilities or whatever, then I assume you know to go through the Disability Resource Center, and then they'll let me know what you need and we can work it out, what you need. But because I'm posting my lectures online, I got my notes online, I think what most people need if they go through Disability Resource Center is things like maybe extra time on the exam. So I'll work with you on a case-by-case basis if that were to come up. Just a quick note about academic misconduct. Obviously, don't cheat. We know that it's easier to cheat now that classes are being taught over Zoom than when they were taught in class. Faculty are aware of this. We know that there are WhatsApp chats for every class that are taught where people discuss things and things like that. In the past, some faculty have even gotten TAs to pose as students to join those chats to make sure students weren't cheating. I've had students email me chat transcripts from WhatsApp where people were discussing cheating and their name and phone numbers are on them, so I know exactly who it is. I'm going to strongly encourage you, do not do that. Do not cheat. If it's discovered that you have been cheating in the class, then that's going to be reported to the school, and that could result in some penalties like getting a 0 in the class or things like that. So again, please do not cheat this class. And then finally, the course calendar on the last few pages lists the topics we're going to go over and the dates that we're going to go over them. This is a rough estimate. We might go a little bit quicker, a little bit more slowly than what the syllabus has here. So this is just kind of a rough estimate to use. If, for instance, by the time we get to exam 1, we haven't covered everything in that last section, the lecture, You're Not as Special as You Think You Are. If you haven't covered everything there, you're only responsible for what we have covered up to that exam, okay? So this will roughly be a guide of what we're covering what days, but it won't be exact. I'll deviate a little bit from this. Make note of the exam dates. Again, if you have any issues because you know you can't make an exam date, then let me know probably 1 to 2 weeks or so ahead of the exam, and we'll make alternative arrangements for you. And again, as I mentioned, the last 5 classes plus the final exam. So that looks like starting on April 1st. I think that's what it is. Starting April 1st in the prejudice lecture, that's going to be all in person. Okay. I'll make more announcements about that to remind people as that date approaches. And then finally, there's a couple dates that you should note to the very bottom of this. You've got until the 19th of this month, which is next week, to drop the class without any financial penalty. So make sure to keep that in mind if you're considering dropping the class. And you've got until March 22nd to drop the class with a drop grade. Are the exams through honor lock? I haven't exactly figured out the specific details of the exams. I'm changing things a little bit from how I did them last semester. So I don't think they will be, but it's possible. I'm going to look into things and get back to everybody about how the exams are going to work exactly. Are there any other questions about the syllabus or how grading works or anything else? Yeah, this is at the main campus. Yeah. Okay, nothing else? Okay, so let's go back to the lecture then. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention, these are the books, the 3 versions of the textbook that you can get. I believe it's is the 11th in the middle, I think, 12th on the left and 13th on the right. So any of those versions is completely fine. All right, so I'm going to start off in the most cliched way possible, where I give the textbook definition of what social psychology is, but I fully recognize that in order to really appreciate what social psychology is, it's probably best to really throw you into it so you get a sense of what it is. These definitions may not be helpful if you're not really familiar with what the topic is. That being said, there's a few things I want to point out in this definition. And the first one is that, as I mentioned before when going over the syllabus, social psychology is the scientific study of how people are influenced by others. Okay, so again, I'm going to stress that scientific aspect throughout the semester, and especially within the first couple of weeks, we're going to talk a lot about what that means exactly. But the main point for now is that it's not just us coming up with ideas and we're just throwing out ideas about human behavior. Every idea we have to test, and we test repeatedly to see if our theories hold water. Second thing I want to point out is that so far I've described social psychology as how our behaviors are influenced by the situation of the environment. And we're going to focus mostly on behaviors, but we're also going to look at various points in time about how people's thoughts or how people's feelings are also influenced by the environment as well. But that being said, we're mostly looking at behaviors in social psychology. And furthermore, I've kind of talked about social psychology as how people are affected by the situation in general. Some people have defined it a little bit more narrowly in terms of how people are influenced by other people, which is also an acceptable definition of social psychology. We're going to see that the presence of other people influences our behavior a lot. And it's not just the actual presence of other people that can influence our behavior, but the imagined presence of other people. And what that means is that if you think there are other people around, or if you think you're in a specific situation, that belief that you have is enough to change your behavior, even if your belief is wrong. And there are numerous studies that we'll talk about in social psychology where people believed they're in a certain situation that they weren't actually in, but that belief was enough to change their behavior. That's what I mean when I say that people's behaviors can be influenced by the imagined presence of others. But that'll all make more sense as we go through the course. The main thesis of social psychology, something that I kind of mentioned before, is this here, that human social thought and social behavior, how we behave in a social situation, is governed heavily by the situation in which those thoughts and behaviors occur. A lot of people believe that our behavior is primarily, if not uniquely, determined by our personality. So if you ask someone, or if you think about why someone did something, it's very easy to explain their behavior in terms of personality characteristics. They did that because they're outgoing, or they're shy, or they're rude, or they're thoughtless, or we have hundreds of words to describe people's personalities. But what we're going to focus on in this class is not on how personality affects behavior, but on how the situation affects our behavior. And that simple concept is very often underappreciated. But if we take this general thesis of social psychology, that if we want to understand people, we need to know the situation that they find themselves in, we can break that down into secondary theses of social psychology as well. And each of these secondary theses is related to this primary thesis, but has a bit of a different flavor to it. So let's talk about those secondary theses. The first secondary thesis of social psychology is not only does a situation affect our behavior, but as I've already mentioned, the power of the situation to affect our behavior is often far greater than people tend to think it is. In other words, we have a tendency to underestimate just how much our behavior is affected by the situation. I'll give you a story to exemplify this. This is Patty Hearst. Patty Hearst in 1974 was kidnapped by the Symbionese Liberation Army, or the SLA for short. And that's probably because her father is an extremely rich person, and so they wanted to kidnap her to use her as leverage to get her father to donate money to certain causes that they were in favor of, and to use his contacts to try to release other SLA members from jail and things like that. And although her father did donate a lot of money to these causes, they did not release Patty Hearst. And for a long time, no one knew where Patty Hearst was when she was kidnapped. Until a few months later, when police were going over some surveillance footage of a bank robbery that they believed was completely unrelated to this case. And what they saw in that footage shocked them, because what they saw was Patty Hearst seemingly robbing the bank. Okay, so she went missing and now she's a bank robber. In fact, that's a picture of her. In fact, what these people later discovered is that she had changed her whole persona. She was now going by the name of Tanya, and she was part of the very group that had kidnapped her months earlier. They finally found Patty Hearst, and they put her on trial for her role in this bank robbery. And what her defense team argued is that while she was kidnapped, she had been effectively brainwashed. So what had happened was that when she was kidnapped, she was kept in a closet for like 2 or 3 months, during which time she was repeatedly abused, both verbally and emotionally and sexually. She was repeatedly told that no one cares about her, no one's coming to help her, that we as the SLA members are the only people who care about you. And the defense argued that this effectively brainwashed her over time to join their group, and that's why she committed this bank robbery. The prosecution, on the other hand, didn't buy this story, and they were arguing that she had complete control over her behaviors, et cetera, et cetera. Now, regardless of which version of those events that you choose to believe, the point is that the pressures, the situational pressures that were acting on Patty Hearst are greater than anything any of us can possibly imagine. And it's really easy for us to sit here and say, you know, if we were in that situation, we certainly wouldn't have gone along with our captors, for instance. But it's almost impossible for us, any of us, to actually know that without undergoing those actual situational pressures, because the power of the situation is much greater in terms of affecting our behavior than we tend to think it is. And that's going to be a general theme, that people underestimate how much the situation affects their behavior. That's going to run under a lot of what we talk about in this course. This will come up in numerous points in this class. A secondary thesis of social psychology is that social thought and social behavior often don't fit into common sense theories. In other words, a lot of behavior that people engage in seems to not make a whole lot of sense until you have a deeper understanding of social psychology, in which case it starts to make a little bit more sense. Because what social psychology does, among many other things, is it lays out some of the fundamental underlying motivations that underscores a lot of human behavior. And if you can understand a lot of these fundamental motivations, you can now start to understand a lot of this seemingly irrational behavior. Oops, an example here. You might have heard of this story. It's a very famous story. But in the 1970s, a man by the name of Jim Jones had an organization, a church, or some people would later call it a cult, called the People's Temple. And the People's Temple at the time was fairly well respected because of its relatively progressive views on racial inclusivity and things like that. But they ran into some trouble with the government because of things like tax evasion and issues like that. So what Jim Jones did is he took his congregation of about 1,000 people or so and moved them down into South America, specifically to Guyana, where he formed Jonestown, what he called Jonestown, which is supposed to be the socialist utopia in the jungle. But not everyone went with Jim Jones. And some people who stayed behind started complaining to authorities that in fact this was a cult and that Jim Jones was mistreating a lot of the people in the congregation. And they were largely ignored, again, because they were relatively well respected at the time. But one person didn't ignore them. His name was Congressman Leo Ryan. So he's a US congressman. And he went to investigate some of these claims. So he took a few people, including people who were videotaping, like reporters, for instance, and flew down to Jonestown to interview some of the people there to see what was going on. And a few people there mentioned that they wanted to leave, but they weren't able to. But on the second or third day that Congressman Leo Ryan was there, someone tried to kill him. And so he gathered the few people who had expressed desire to leave, and they went to the airfield to fly out of there. And as they're boarding the plane, this Jeep comes out of the jungle. And on this Jeep, there are a few people with guns, and they start opening fire on people getting onto the plane. In fact, they end up killing the congressman. As I said, there was a reporter there, and that person was filming. This is a shot. It's kind of hard to make out what's going on here. This is a shot from when this happened. This is the truck. This is one of the guys here that is opening fire on the people getting on the plane. There's a bit of a plume of smoke here after the gunshot. But what's happened here is that Jim Jones had sent these people to basically assassinate the people getting on the plane. And he had effectively assassinated a sitting US congressman. Now, Jim Jones knew that once the US learned that a congressman had been effectively assassinated, that they were going to be in a lot of trouble. So what he did is, back in Jonestown, he gathered everybody around and he told them that the US government is coming for them and they're going to shut them down. And when they get there, they're going to rip their babies and their children away from them. And they're going to torture people. They're going to torture their children. And what he tells them is that we can't let that happen. And what he has is this giant vat filled with grape flavor aid. It's basically like Kool-Aid, but he's put cyanide in it, basically a poison. And what he tells them is that we can't let the US government come here and arrest us and rip our children away from us. What we need to do is one at a time come up and drink from this poisoned vat of flavor aid and kill ourselves. Now, keep in mind that there are families living in Jonestown. There are hundreds of children. And what he tells the parents of these children to do is to come up and, for even babies, to fill a syringe with this poison and put it in their babies' mouths and kill their own children before taking it themselves. And amazingly, this is what people start doing. People start killing their kids prior to killing themselves. When this was all said and done, over 900 people died that day, including about 275 or so children. Here are some pictures of some of the aftermath of what is, I believe it's the largest mass suicide in history. This is only a fraction of the people who killed themselves that day, but you can see at the very front of the picture, this is the vat filled with the poisoned flavor aid, and you can see bodies being strewn everywhere. Here's another image. Again, you could just see bodies everywhere, right? This is a fraction, a tiny fraction of all the people that killed themselves that day. Now, the question I have for you is, what common sense theory of human behavior do we have that can explain what happened at Jonestown that day? How do we explain why people would kill not only themselves, but their own babies, their own children, just because this man told them to? It's kind of difficult to do this, right? And I'm not saying that social psychology is going to shed light into exactly what happened that day. It's not going to answer every question we have. But by understanding things like persuasion, how we persuade others, and the factors that persuade other people, we can start to develop a bit more of an understanding of what happened that day. A third secondary thesis of social psychology, which is related to something we talked about before, is that people's perceptions are more important in terms of how it affects their behavior than are the objective features of the situation. This is related to the point I made before, that if people just believe they're in a situation, that belief is enough to change their behavior, even if that belief is wrong. In fact, this is kind of the reason why propaganda works, right? So if you look at propaganda, so this is propaganda from Iraq, where the then leader of Iraq, Saddam Hussein, is trying to portray himself, instead of the dictator that he is, he's trying to portray himself as a bold, powerful, decisive leader, right? A strong leader. And the reason this sort of propaganda works is because it changes people's perceptions of who he is without actually changing the objective features of the situation. This is propaganda from the US during World War II, where the attempt was to dehumanize the Japanese because we were at war with the Japanese. And of course, it's difficult to talk about propaganda without talking about Nazi Germany, where again, we see in this case Adolf Hitler using propaganda to portray himself. You could basically see in this picture that he's trying to portray himself as ordained by God, right? The skies are opening up and the lights are shining down on him. And again, trying to change people's perceptions of what's happening in Nazi Germany without actually changing the objective features of what's actually happening. Okay, so if we want to understand people's behavior, we have to know not just what the situation is that they're in, but how they perceive that situation, because it's those perceptions that matter. And a fourth secondary thesis of social psychology is that although I am focusing on the situational aspect of things, if we really want to understand people's behavior, we really have to understand that it's a function of both the person and the situation. It's the confluence of people's personality as well as the environment they find themselves in. And it's the interaction between those two that's responsible for people's behavior. This is an important point to understand. So back at the beginning of the Iraq War, so let's go way back to 2003, when the US went to war with Iraq. Within a few months of the beginning of that war, a big scandal broke, which was that in a prison in Iraq that was being operated by the American military, the prison is called Abu Ghraib, that a lot of the American soldiers were found to be abusing the prisoners that were there. And there are a few famous pictures that came out of this scandal. Here are a couple of them, where the American soldiers were basically using these prisoners as their own playthings and having them do all sorts of various things. They were torturing them in some part, and they were humiliating them in other parts, and they were proud of what they were doing, and they were taking pictures of this. This was a huge scandal, because when this comes out in the international community, this looks really bad for the US, right? Now, when this occurred, the army is quick to say, you know, don't judge us by a few bad apples, right? Obviously, they don't want public opinion to turn against the military at wartime, right? So they basically said these are a few bad apples. It's not representative of the rest of the military. But is it actually true? Because what they're basically saying is that the behaviors of these people were results specifically of these specific personality styles, these specific people, right? If there's something evil or something about these individuals that led them to do this, and that's it. But not everyone agreed with this. Some people said that it's more than just the personality that led to this behavior. We have to also understand how the situation might have affected this people's behavior. We have to understand how things like, well, these people were oftentimes getting orders from people above them, which might have changed their behavior. Or they found themselves occupying a prison and they could hear at night bombs going off all around them. They're in a high stress situation. And there could have been something about that stress that might have also contributed to their behavior. And that's not an attempt to excuse the behavior that these people engaged in, but simply an attempt to understand the basis of it. That if we really want to understand behavior, we need to know not only the personality of the people engaging in it, but also how the situation might have affected their behavior. And what's really interesting, I think, about the Abu Ghraib scandal is that this behavior had been foreshadowed about 30 years prior in a famous study known as the Stanford Prison Study that we'll talk about later on in this course. This is a video cam shot of that part of that study. In that study, people were basically randomly told or randomly assigned to play the role of prisoners or prison guards. And what quickly happens at the prison guards started to abuse the prisoners. And some of the ways in which they abused them were kind of eerily similar to what would actually happen in the real world 30 years later, as you can see in these images. We'll talk more about that study later on. Okay. But I don't want to give you the impression that social psychology is only used to discuss these extreme, historical events. But social psychology can be used to explain all sorts of day-to-day behavior. For instance, we're going to look at rioting behavior. We just saw this last week, right, where we had a giant riot at the Capitol. In many senses, rioting behavior doesn't seem to make a lot of sense on the surface. So if you think about what happened last week, for instance, here we've got like hundreds of people who are committing felonies, right? They are breaking into the Capitol. You are not allowed to do that. You are not allowed to try to overthrow the American government. These are incredible felonies. And yet when they break into the Capitol, they are live streaming themselves. They're taking pictures of themselves. They're basically filming themselves commit crimes, right? Why would people do that sort of thing? How do we explain the logic behind that sort of behavior? And even if we take or if we think about rioting, not in the context of what happened last week, but more general rioting behavior, it's probably not too often that you see someone leave a bar and then decide to jump on a car and start smashing it with a baseball bat. But if you get enough people together in the right circumstances, that often happens in rioting behavior. So how can we use social psychology to explain rioting behavior? When we look at group processes later on in this course, we're going to look at some social psychological theories that can help us explain some of the seemingly irrational behaviors that occur during riots. We can also use social psychology to explain even more mundane events. Like, for instance, we can use social psychology to explain why we're friends with the people we're friends with, or why we're enemies with the people we're enemies with. When we look at attraction, we're going to look at that, for instance. We can use it to explain why we love the people that we love, or why we dislike the people that we dislike, or why we hate the people that we hate. We're going to look at that as well. We can use social psychology to explain why, when you come across this person downtown, you don't provide help. On the other hand, we can use social psychology to explain acts of heroism as well. So a lot of you might be familiar with this video that the screenshot was taken from. Again, this was from last Wednesday at the insurrection at the Capitol. This guy's name, this guard here, his name is Eugene Goodman. In fact, let me show you a video of that. Again, I imagine that many of you are familiar with this video, but I do want to share it because I want to point something out that some of you might have learned recently, but in case you haven't, I want to point this out. You see this guy, this guard, basically the mob that's coming into the Capitol, right? He's trying to defend one person against the entire mob. His life is potentially at risk as the mob is chasing him up the stairs of the Capitol. But what we're going to see is that when he comes up the next set of stairs, there's an open hallway.
Second floor!
We're going to see an open hallway to the left of the screen. He's going to look down that hallway in just 1 second. He looks down at what he sees, that there's an open door. And the open door that he sees is the door to the Senate chambers. That has been unsecured. There could be senators in there that are unprotected. And he knows that he's got to keep those people away from the Senate chamber. So watch what he does. The first thing he does is he blocks access to that door. Then he realizes he's only one person. He'd be overrun by the mob if they go down there. So his idea, which he just, as far as I know, came up spur of the moment, is to entice the mob to start chasing him away from the Senate doors, which he does by pushing this guy and then walking in the other direction and trying to get them to follow him. Which is exactly what they end up doing. Now, had he not thought of that on the spot, that mob might have gone in the other direction and might have found sitting senators, and who knows what would happen at that point. So what some people are saying now is that this guy, Eugene Goodman, is basically a hero for doing what he did. Basically, what he did was he risked his own life at the hands of an angry mob to try to help people who were potentially in that Senate chamber. And so later on in the course, we're going to look at helping, and we're going to see how we can use social psychology to explain why it's the case that some people will provide help like that, like Eugene Goodman did in some situations, but then not provide help in other situations as well. We can even get more mundane than this. Let's say that if you are out somewhere and you get picked up by a friend, let's say things are normal and you're actually on campus at school, right? And after class, a friend picks you up in this car. And the question is, where are you going to sit? Well, chances are you're going to sit in the front seat, right? You're going to sit in the passenger seat. On the other hand, if you were picked up in this car, where are you going to sit now? Well, almost surely you're going to sit in the back seat, right? Now, why is that? Why is it that you're going to sit in different seats depending on which car that you're picked up in? Well, it's partly because we have all sorts of social rules and social norms that exist within a given society, right? And one of those rules is, well, you're going to sit in the passenger seat if it's only you and a friend, but if it's a stranger like a taxi cab, you sit in the back seat. It's not a law. You could sit in the back seat when your friend picks you up, and you could sit in the front seat when a taxi picks you up with the driver's permission, but almost invariably we don't, right? What this is indicating is that your behavior, even these mundane behaviors, are dictated in large part by all sorts of these social rules that exist. There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these social rules that you're not even aware influence your behavior on almost a moment by moment basis. I'll give you a couple other examples. Let's say you go to the movies. Let's say it's a really small independent theater like this. And so this is the theater that you get to. And the question is, where are you going to sit in this theater? And the answer to this question is probably any seat except for this one and this one, the ones to this woman's immediate right and immediate left, okay? Now, why is that the case? Well, because there's an unwritten rule that you do not sit right next to a stranger unless you have to. You always leave a space. When you go to class on the first day, this is what you do, right? If you're looking for a place to sit, you don't sit in the seat right next to them. If you're able to leave a space, you will always leave a space. There's no law that says you can't sit next to them, but it's going to be pretty uncomfortable for you if you do sit right next to them, because you're breaking that social rule that you're not even aware of is influencing your behavior at the time. And in fact, I have an outstanding challenge. I give this challenge every year, every class that I give, which is to go to a movie theater. Now, you can't do this during COVID necessarily, but under normal circumstances, go to a movie theater, have a friend film you as you sit right next to someone in an otherwise empty theater, and just sit beside them in that chair and don't say anything to them. And no one's ever taken me up on this offer. And I want the friend to film it so I can show it in class. No one's ever taken me up on this offer because it is incredibly uncomfortable to do this, right? It's going to be uncomfortable for you. It's going to be uncomfortable for the person sitting next to you to do this, because you are blatantly breaking a social norm, all right? A social rule that's dictating our behavior. Well, here's one for the guys. If you go to the bathroom and you want to use a urinal, which urinal are you going to use? Now, the answer to this has nothing to do with the women who are pictured on the screen here. What's going to happen is that, and every guy knows, if you go to the bathroom, you do not use a urinal right next to someone who's at a urinal. You leave as much space as possible between you and that person. Again, there's no law that says you can't pee right beside someone, but that social rule is really strong, right? We know what that social rule is. I do not have a challenge for this. Do not film yourself peeing next to someone in the bathroom. I'm not going to show that in class. Do not do that, okay? But again, what we're seeing is that these social rules, these hundreds of social rules dictate our behavior constantly. Okay? Here's another one. This is another scene from last week, right? The insurrection at the Capitol. I want to play this clip. It's like 20 seconds or something. And I want you to notice if there's anything weird about it, other than the fact that people are breaking into the Capitol to overthrow the government. But other than that, see if there's anything else that you find weird about this. Okay. Did anyone notice what's kind of weird about it? Yeah, how about the fact that these people just broke into the Capitol to try to basically to try to overthrow the American government. These are effectively a group of domestic terrorists that have done this, and yet they won't cross that velvet rope, right? Those velvet ropes are enough to constrain them in that path, right? I think like one guy stepped outside. Like that's what they're concerned with, is going outside the velvet rope after they've just broken into the Capitol. Now, why is that the case? Well, it's the case because we're so conditioned that when we see these ropes, that we stay in between them, right? We're so conditioned that even after these people have broken windows to get into the Capitol, to commit insurrection, their sort of tendency is to just obey these social rules, right? By staying inside those ropes. Now, they didn't always stay inside those velvet ropes, and later on they broke a lot more rules as well. But at least for this time, they were sort of mindlessly following these social norms that we have. That's how strong these social norms are. Okay, I am going to end things here for this class. So we will, of course, pick up on Thursday. The one thing I want you to do then, remember, is between now and next Tuesday is to get a Top Hat account, okay? So make sure to do that, and then we'll go over exactly how Top Hat's going to work on Tuesday. If anyone has any questions or anything else, I will hang out for the next few minutes. And then I can create private breakout rooms, or you can ask them publicly or whatever. For those of you who don't have any questions, feel free to take off, and I will see you on Thursday. See you guys.